So we're all back in the same room for the first time in like a month or something like that, guys.
Who are you guys?
It's not quite Led Zeppelin reunion level, Dave, but what would be the appropriate comparison to the four of us getting back together?
Led
here?
Zeppelin, who famously never reformed, yes.
Well, I mean, theoretically.
For one show,
Van Halen.
in 07, that doesn't really count, but...
Dave Lee's back in the saddle, yeah.
So something much lower down the ladder than Led Zeppelin would be relevant here, I guess. Much
I do
lower.
believe our cultural significance lags significant behind Led Zeppelin currently.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah.
Plus, I think most of our listeners don't even get these references.
That's entirely possible also. So that means moving on. The news is back. Lots to talk about this week. Really a lot of things to talk about, actually. Interesting stuff, too. But, one quick thing we want to take care of, one quick bit of business we want to mention before we dive into the news. Is a shout out, some grateful thanks for listening to the show. We got a nice message a couple of weeks ago from Paulina. I don't think she wants us to use her last name. She probably would not want to be associated with us publicly, but we got a really nice message from Paulina telling us that she really enjoys listening to the show. And Paulina, thanks for listening, and thanks for taking the time to let us know you enjoy it. And we encourage everybody to, everybody. It would be cool if everybody, Josh, took a minute to send us a message to say how much they love us.
It really would,
It
yes.
would be cool.
Yeah.
Not going to happen, but we'll see. Anyway, thanks, Paulina, for listening. So let's jump right into our first subject this week. This is something we've mentioned a few times recently. This is the upcoming elections. Until this week, we didn't know when exactly they were going to take place. But President Duda, exercising one of his powers as president, announced October 13th as the big day. So we're, let's call it, right at 2 months out from the elections. Dr. Mike, seems like there's an element of drama kind of missing from the elections because it seems that the conclusions are pretty much foregone.
Well, yeah, for the major parties, basically, they don't really care about this date. Prime Minister Morawiecki a few weeks ago let it slip that he possibly might know what the date was going to be during a conference, and technically the president's the one who's supposed to make the call on this, but we know that, they come from the same political background, so they kind of knew this going in as well. But now that the election date has been set, the campaign can technically begin, which is kind of odd because you might have noticed watching the news, as a lot of politicians were already saying who's going to be running where, from what list, from what party, coalitions, but you're not allowed to technically start campaigning before the campaign starts.
I love the way Morawiecki tried to claim that keeping a tight election cycle and an early date was somehow spreading peace and love through the political process.
Duda said that as well, which I think is like it is the most cynical BS. I mean, the truth is this kills it for the smaller parties because right now they've cut down the amount of time that smaller parties have to collect signatures to fill out petitions to actually run from what was, I think, 60 days in the last election down to only 25 days.
Couldn't agree more. Classic incumbent trick there. I hate that word. It's disgusting.
And PO don't really care because they know they get enough signatures in time, so they're going to get in. It really makes it difficult for the smaller parties, the ones that only get like 5 or 10%. This is why a lot of the smaller parties are like trying to band together in order to have the chance to run for elections anyway.
Dr. Mike, give us some background on kind of a related subject and something that is something that's a source of some controversy going into the elections, and that is the way that they are organized, I think literally on paper, the way that the list of candidates is presented and how each candidate is given a number and how the number they're given and their place on the list is actually really important.
Well, because, in Poland you have that system where you can only choose one person, but all the selections are broken down into categories of parties, their lists. And then you have all their candidates numbered on this list. And usually the top spot, the number one, is the most coveted position because it's the one that people first usually read, the one they usually recognize, and the one they usually cross off. Of course, politicians want their position to be the top one because they're more likely to win. Not that, the position actually matters, but what happens is if a party wins enough votes to get somebody in, then the electoral board looks at the list and see who on their list got the most votes. And usually it's the ones at the top of the list, just because people are lazy.
Isn't that weird that people vote for whoever's first on the list?
They assume that was the preference of the party or whatever, like that they're at the top of the list for a reason, I suppose.
It's acknowledged worldwide, though, isn't it? That there is a kind of, the first person on the list does tend to get more
So
votes.
if you're last on the list, you're in trouble, basically. Huh?
Yes, no matter how popular you might be in the local area, which is another terrible thing here, because right now it's the parties decide who's on the list and in what position. So it's not like local party members or people living here, supporting their local officials or activists, and we like this person. No, somebody in Warsaw at the headquarters decides, let's stick this person here because he's popular and he'll get more votes. Oh, how about this person? He supported us last year, so his prize will be to be on the top of this list in this area. It's really, really sneaky, and it's horrible.
It's interesting because in the UK, I don't know about the case in Ireland or the United States, but it's just simply an alphabetical order of the surname of the candidate. And I would guess that someone like Jobro, for example, might not be too kind of keen about a system that uses alphabetical order, but that's just a theory.
It's big news. It doesn't really help.
Yeah, no, he's screwed either way. Yeah,
And you see these things on those big posters and campaign billboards that suddenly appear everywhere like mushrooms after the rain, and in the lead up to the election. It's the name, and then it's like number 3 on the list, number 4 on the list, number 8 on the list. Right? That's basically how they're communicating.
Are you alleging that Polish people can't read Polish and need to have numbers instead of names?
That's what they do on the campaign materials. They say number 2 on the list. I mean, is that basically the cheat sheet version of voting for your candidate, Dr. Mike?
Pretty much, yeah. It's they just try to burn into somebody's memory the number of which list and which position on that list. And that's what you want the electorate to remember.
Easier to remember a number than a name, I guess.
And this is a quirk of politics that most Polish people are aware of, but obviously, some people can be manipulated.
One little more thing I want to just add about this list system, why I really, really hate it. If you wanted to run as an independent here in Krakow to get into Sejm, you have absolutely no chance. Because if you're not in a party, you can't just run. You can't just collect votes and run. You would have to create your own party or committee.
That is quite the obstacle course in any parliamentary system. There's always kind of difficulties around the rules.
No, but it's just imagine in the U.S. It's like the reason AOC won is because she got a lot of funding in her local little primary, and she won that local primary, so she got in. There's nothing like that here, even within the party system. If you want to run as independent, you're screwed.
Yeah. And do you have like a sponsorship system here?
No, there's nothing like that. You basically have to create your own committee, kind of like your own party or group, and not only get the 100,000 signatures, but also get 5% nationwide.
Deep in the weeds here on parliamentary.
Yeah. So it's about the bottom line. No such thing as a little guy takes on the establishment in Poland.
Nope.
No Rocky Balboa stories here.
Nothing like that happening. And because of the short election cycle now, it's the bigger parties will win even more.
Let's move on to something that's on the agenda of the European Court of Justice this week, Dave. It's something that was big news here in Poland about a decade ago, and it involves the Swiss franc. Tell us what this is all about.
Well, for some reason, it became the vogue to take your mortgage out in Swiss francs. And then after the financial crash, when the Polish zloty lost massive value towards the Swiss franc, that became a big issue because the payments went up.
Weren't people doing it because the Swiss franc had a long-established tradition of stability?
Exactly, yeah. But then, the world was thrown into pretty much financial chaos for a few years. We can't be too harsh on the situation. But there were other reasons as well. The Swiss government themselves had a policy of pushing up the currency, and that didn't help.
So suddenly people had to make mortgage payments that were 30-40% maybe more than what they would have been.
To double, after a while.
Up to double, okay.
Yeah, now it's about double. But if you wouldn't, after it started crashing, people stopped taking out those loans. I forgot the
exact numbers, but this affects something like 1 million people, more than 1 million people who took out loans in Poland in francs.
But you have to remember that most of these people that took out these francs took them out years earlier and paid off most of it. And a lot of the people that were affected, at their last few years of mortgage payments were higher, but still the stats I was reading were saying that most of them were still ahead financially than if they had taken out.
Okay, so they signed the papers. Look, we all know when you take out a loan, you got to sign your name 1 million times. They knew the risk going in. They knew their loan was denominated in a foreign currency, subject to market fluctuations.
Market fuck you.
Also, so what is their legal basis to stand on here? What's their argument? They lost a bet, so they pay.
Well, one of their main arguments is that the banks were forcefully selling this product, suggesting that don't worry, it's not going to change.
It's the way you advise your customers.
So they were deceived. That's the idea.
And there was another thing in the contracts that is being debated whether it was legal or not, is you're paying these loans back off in Swiss francs, but you couldn't go around the corner to the exchange and get a good rate for your own zlotys to francs. You could only exchange francs through the bank at their exchange rate, which usually was not that great. And when you're talking about, thousands, tens of thousands of zlotys,
back margin everywhere.
that makes a difference. So you never actually saw the francs. You never did anything with them. You were giving them zlotys, and they were converting that at their own rate into francs. And that's one thing that they're saying, that the banks were cheating people out of, several percent there as well.
I would say though, Mike, that it's a very serious issue, because all of the core domestic banks have long been suspected of harbouring very, very bad loan books on this. This is only a small portion of the possible legal cases that could come into play. It's a precedent that could be set here that could launch a wave, and stock prices have reflected that in the recent days.
No, I'm sympathetic to
people
the people.
are very worried about this.
I'm sympathetic to the people who have to pay, double the mortgage payment or whatever. But I think it's fair to ask that had the market gone the other way, had the value of the Swiss franc been cut in half, and their mortgage payment was suddenly, a joke, would they be suing the bank for, having been sold a deceptive loan? No, they wouldn't.
No, I get what you're saying.
They're suing because they're on the wrong side of it.
I totally get what you're saying, but what I'm saying is the overall exposure to these loans in the core retail banks is still massive. They are big, bad problems.
So what are they asking for? Let's say the European Court of Justice sides with the mortgage holders. Or the mortgage takers. Who are they? The customers.
Mortgage providers or the customers, yeah.
The customers. The little guy. What are they supposed to do? Say you don't have to pay anymore?
No, they would still have to pay, but the question is, if those clauses that, say you could only buy the franc from their exchange rate, if those few clauses were considered illegal,
then the whole contract invalidated?
Yeah, and the question is, how then would they be paying this back? At what rate? Would it automatically be switched into zlotys? And if it was switched into zlotys, then at what exchange rate? There's a lot of question marks here. Nobody knows exactly what would happen.
Well, it would add enormously to the administrative cost for the banks if people started having to have their own kind of Swiss franc accounts that they then paid Swiss francs into, as opposed to you just shovel a load of zloty at them and then they kind of don't worry, we'll take care of that and obviously take our markup. And
is this still a thing? Is this still a thing? Can you take a loan today in Swiss francs? Is it still available?
If you're exceptionally retarded, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it's a device that's being used much.
No, in Poland right now, I think they changed that. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe now in Poland you're required to take a loan out in the currency that you earn. So for most Poles, that's
and generally Polish banks apply a 20% deposit rule as well. I mean, they're generally pretty sensible about how they issue home loans, I think. So this was a one-off kind of big bang crisis. I have much sympathy with it, considering what Ireland went through.
Well, that's true. I mean,
housing meltdown and
across the European Union, Poland is kind of famous for not allowing risky loans.
Yeah, but kind of as well.
That's why the francs became popular, because there was a loophole that they could give loans to more people because it was technically not in zlotys.
Ah, right.
Well, people have long suspected why the Polish banks didn't take big write-downs when this happened, and they've kind of kept all the loans on the books, and that's the big issue at play here, is that they've been long fingering this for so long rather than getting out in front of it, paying off, setting aside future profits for fines, etc., holding their hands up, as has happened in many of these big cases, in the UK and in Ireland, insurance companies, etc. They haven't done that. Now they've got the gun to their head, and if this ruling goes against them, I predict this won't be the last time we'll be covering this story.
Do we know if there's a particular bank or a couple of banks that are more involved than others, or this is an industry-wide thing?
A lot of banks, but I think Millennium, M-Bank were two of the big ones. There were a few other ones that were involved.
Neither of those are Polish-owned, are they?
M-Bank, I know it's Commerzbank from the Germans.
I think M-Bank is German. And I think most of the big banks here are foreign-owned to one degree or another.
Yeah, well, I was with Deutsche Bank when I moved here, but that morphed into Santander, 6 months or so ago.
Which was the bank that was owned by a big Irish company, Dave? Wasn't there? Was it Peba VBK? I think VBK.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. But this comment came from ING Bank's Brunon Bartkiewicz.
Well done, Dave.
We're back in the saddle.
In our case, in the negative scenario, it could mean a loss in a single quarter, he said, citing the bank's small Swiss loan portfolio. For our friends on the market, it could be a number of quarters. What he's saying is all of the core banks still have huge exposure to this. That is a massive amount of money we're talking about. If you're talking about years of a single core bank with massive retail profits having to pay it all off in loans, is that good for confidence in the Polish economy? No, the regulator will have to step in. It's nearly a full-blown financial crisis if it goes that way.
We'll see what happens.
That would have to open up the other bucket of lawsuits. Obviously, I mean, that might not happen. And Polish courts will come into play, and we know how they
the next chapter. Let's bring it back to something local here. Let's go to some local news. Yellow boxes are a thing in the UK, Ireland, and elsewhere. And you may have seen them here around Krakow in the last couple of weeks, last couple of months, actually, because there was like a pilot program. I'm not sure exactly where they were used, but they were used in a number of locations around town. And the results are in, and the recommendation to go citywide with the yellow boxes is going forward. If you don't know what it is, Dave, tell us what yellow boxes are all about.
Before I give my opinion, I'd like Josh to give one of his lovely little explanations about what the fuck a yellow box is.
Okay, what is it first, and then your experience with yellow boxes, Josh?
Okay, well, I'm old enough to remember when yellow boxes first made their appearance in the United Kingdom, which was, greeted with massive excitement.
Roughly what year was that?
This would have been Beatles, Pink Floyd still, with Sid Barrett.
That's enough clues, I think.
Bell bottoms.
So the idea of a yellow box, for all of those unfamiliar with the notion, is that when you have a road junction, usually when it's two major roads and you have busy traffic coming from all directions, and when the lights change and you have a situation when there are vehicles stuck in the middle, which means that the other flow of traffic can no longer proceed. And the idea of having this yellow box, which is actually a kind of like diagonal cross-hatched yellow thing painted on the road, and that you're not allowed to enter the yellow box unless you can exit it from your chosen exit. If your chosen exit is backed up with traffic, you cannot enter the yellow box. So that means when the lights change, that the traffic from the other direction can make its way across, assuming their exit is clear, of course, blah, 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 blah. And this is a very, very good thing because it allows traffic to flow if only one street is blocked but the others are flowing freely. And
visual reminder.
It's a visual reminder. And I have a side-splitting anecdote of my own to kind of, add to the discussion.
You're ready to laugh.
Okay, hold on to your hats. When I was really very young, I'd not been driving very long. The first time that I was
Seven.
The first time I was ever stopped by a police person was for being in a yellow box after the traffic lights had changed and thus blocking the flow of traffic in the opposite direction. This was in Piccadilly Circus in London, which is perhaps not the most insignificant junction in the entirety of the United Kingdom. So I had to go and present my documents at the police station a few days later.
Busted.
Good story.
Busted. So you said these are used in crossings, but that also includes roundabouts as well, right? Or at least I think in the Polish version anyway, they're meant to be used in roundabouts primarily.
Yeah, because you're kind of thinking, do we have enough space? Will I get around the bend there? Is there enough cars? And the yellow box is a great little visual way of just showing you, don't try, pal.
I just wonder how many people are actually going to know what it means and, more importantly, care.
Respect
all right. Adoption may take a while, but I think if the concept's out there, people will catch on to eventually. I was going to say in general, Josh, wouldn't you say there's a lot more emphasis put on those road visual aids, like, marking the way, special lanes to airports or crossings, or, there's a lot of information on the roads in Ireland that I don't see printed in the vibrant way it is back home. One
of the things I do
proof driving, which is a good thing, I suppose.
One of the things I do remember when the yellow boxes were first introduced, or the junction box, I believe they were called, not to be confused with like electricians use. Was that when you were approaching a junction with one such box, there would be a sign saying, junction box ahead, do not enter the yellow cross-hatched area unless your chosen exit is clear.
How big was this sign? It's been enormous.
Look, it wasn't the entirety of what I just said was on the side. It began at "Do not enter."
Huge sign.
Only Josh could turn a road sign into a full paragraph.
J.R. Tolkien actually kind of was involved in scripting these signs. Yeah.
No, it's like I want this to go into effect and people to actually pay. Near where I live, when we drive out of our building and want to hit an intersection, it is always jam packed. Like we can't get out of our own street because there's traffic there. And, they can see us waiting there to get in.
And so no yellow box is going to fix that. That's my opinion.
Sorry, Michael.
My wife actually, she's gotten to the point where she just becomes an a-hole driver and literally squeezes in. And instead of like turning right onto the first lane, she goes into the middle of the intersection like diagonally to block other cars.
Just doing what you have to do.
And then like letting the other cars behind us drive past first before she, goes on further. She's like one of those like people like, you're going to fuck with us and then we're going to fuck with you,
I agree with you, Dave. I find the Polish road signage to be severely lacking. not just in the little extras, but just even in the basics. My favorite example of this is when there's some kind of road work going on. And you learn about it approximately 10 meters before you crash into it. There's a sign that says, it's like, oh, by the way, your lane ends now.
Oh, actually, my experience on the motorway is that you've been queuing and crawling in traffic for a good 20, 25 minutes or so, and then you come across a sign that says, roadworks ahead.
Yeah, anything connected with construction or delays, it's just like, oh, by the way, you can't drive here, and you have to.
Detour was 2 miles back.
Yeah, exactly. You have to get out of this lane right now. There's never any advance warning on that stuff at all. Yeah, I'm skeptical. Dave, you think there's?
I thought it was quite funny. Sorry, before I forget, they're testing it in Chechen, and there was a comment from the spokesperson, which I think was translated in this article, maybe made it a bit funnier. It was kind of like, the experiment is not going well.
I'm skeptical. The idea is to decrease blockage, thus increasing the traffic flow, and maybe marginally improve the miserable life we have here as commuters in the streets. Dave, any chance? Do you agree with the guy who says the experiment's not going well, or do you think this might speed up the flow on the streets of Krakow?
I have great faith that the Polish driver will, when he figures out what the fuck the yellow box is for, actually use it and be grateful for the civic.
Yeah, what kind of public education program do you have to launch when you're introducing an entirely new concept on the streets? Because
who invented the yellow box? That's what I want to know.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it was a British invention. It's got that kind of mixture of kind of solid pragmatism and kind of fair play,
concern for order and organization.
Yes, yeah. I know that when I took my driving test back, before Mike Krosky was president, and that it was actually.
Zing.
Is that it was actually a feature of my driving test that I had to explain the correct functioning of a yellow box to the
Well, as someone who just spent this weekend 4 hours on the autostrada in Poland, I have zero confidence in the ability of Polish drivers to conform to anything that is meant to promote the common good. It's just it's a white knuckle nightmare experience.
But I mean, you went to Rzeszów, and before there was an autostrada there, it would have taken you at least 4 hours to get.
Well, that's true. It's an hour and 45 minutes, not even. That's with a stop. Hour and 45 minutes. It's great, and prior to the autostrada, you're right, 3.5, 4 hours at least. But it comes at the price of potential death at any moment. Dave, you look like you're looking for something. What's the...
Box junctions were introduced in the UK during 1967. Very accurate with your musical references too.
My God, I was.
Memory's still not gone.
The first one in Piccadilly Circus, actually, yeah.
Anyway, suppose it was British, and it fucking was.
The first person to be stopped and cited.
Oh my God, my only Wikipedia citation.
All right, well, speaking of transport and speaking of possible death at any moment, let's move on to another favorite subject that we've talked about quite a bit, and that is scooters. The invasion of electric scooters. We have a lot of opinions on this.
Bouncy scooters.
It's back in the news this week because Gazeta Prawna, it's a newspaper, legal newspaper, they did some research. They talked to some hospitals around the country, and they have confirmed that the scooter plague is resulting in real traffic to emergency rooms all over the country.
Plenty of quotes in this article. Didn't get the feeling they were having much trouble getting a quote.
No, very easy. I think all the people who work, first responders and emergency room people are happy to tell you that scooters, are a problem. Nothing we didn't know already, guys, but this is only going to get worse as scooters kind of reach every corner of the country.
Well, I have to say, reaching back into the sands of time, we did use our Bayesian reasoning to fucking predict all of this. The ankle level impacts is what we were worried about. And didn't it say in that article that lots of the victims have been pedestrians, not people?
But half the people involved are pedestrians.
Well, obviously they're all people, but people being hit by the scooters is becoming a big issue. Yeah. I'm always walking around, and that's what I'm thinking about, because I'm always out walking, and I'm thinking, one of them hits me in the ankle, that's going to be really painful. They're solidly built, them things. I had a look at a fella.
One of them hits you in the ankle, it's going to be really painful for the rider, I think.
Gentleman who packed one up near where I work, clearly owns his own model, and hoisted it folded it up and hoisted it into his arms. It must weigh 15 to 20 kilos.
It's like the lithium-ion batteries. They're freaking heavy.
He did not look like it was an easy lift for him. Like, you know.
So, I mean, are they going to introduce legislation that all of these, that all scooters should carry like a grisly photograph of a damaged ankle or...
We're already carrying one idiot each, so...
Sometimes two, actually.
Idiots. Well, the double scooter riding phenomenon I had a chance to observe close up, having a few pints and Duffys on Friday. And let me tell you, it's rampant down that part of the city. You know, 2s, 3s, people messing around, falling off them. Clearly, you've never ridden a scooter before. You know, it's ridiculous. Like, yeah.
Guys, I was in Warsaw a couple of weeks ago, and I think here in Krakow, we can't even compare. As bad as it is here, as annoying as it is here in Warsaw, it's 10 times worse.
I can imagine, because it's a bit wider, the pavements. It's
wider, there's more area, more space, especially around the Palace of Culture area. Yeah. And I would estimate that at least a third of the people out were on scooters, zooming everywhere. Having
briefly lived and commuted in Warsaw, let me tell you, the little distances between the stations can be a lot longer than they fucking look. The Platz is enormous, man. So I'm not surprised by that at all. Yeah, I would say. Is
there an element? This great word from German, the Schadenfreude, the taking pleasure in the suffering of others.
Absolutely.
Is there an element here? Are we kind of glad to see these scooter people getting their just desserts?
Also, yeah, I haven't seen a full-on collision yet. I suppose it would depend on the seriousness of who fell over and what age profile. If it was a hipster kind of, looking a bit smug, and then all of a sudden the fact he was vaping made him crash, I might raise the chuckle, but,
Checking Instagram, vaping, and
I do have
adjusting his man bun.
I go back to my fair comment and the last time we spoke about this. On long bike paths, I've no issue with them, all right? When there's enough room for the cyclists and the scooters, with the long runs, some... like the river, like going over the bridges in Krakow, some of the places there could be appropriate for it if you know how to ride them and you want to risk your own ankles, I suppose.
I think the river's an excellent place for scooters, actually.
Yeah, but
right in the middle, yes.
But yeah, to be fair, the footpath thing is becoming a bit of a menace. Like, the footpaths in Krakow are not wide, they're not roomy, and they do not need a scooter.
Well, just by coincidence, there was some progress on a related issue, again, something else we've talked about in the past. That is how scooters are legally categorized. Because part of the problem with the scooters for a long time, and this is true in places all over the world, in many jurisdictions, is that the law doesn't know what to do with them, right? Do we treat them as a motorized vehicle? Do we treat them as a bicycle or something else? And here in Poland, we have word that the Minister of Transport is going to classify them as bicycles. Now, if that means...
Well, we collect them all up, crush them and classify them as scrap.
People on scooters are supposed to wear helmets. Are they subject to the same drink driving laws that apply to cyclists?
Well, they would, definitely the drink driving would be applied. They're not sure. That's the thing, is it's still in that gray area. Everybody's been talking about legislation, but nobody's actually put something down specifically and voted on it yet, unfortunately.
Somebody needs to sort it out. This is a big win for somebody, maybe your boy Gabala, John, who never returns your calls. Like, maybe Rukash can get this. Get a motion tabled here. Because let me tell you something. Let me just say one thing. Krakow's police and Straż Miejska are some of the strictest ruling forces on this planet and will crush this menace the second they're given their head to do it. I guarantee you they've all got little plans amongst themselves how they're going to decimate these scooterists. I know they can't like this. What do you think? What do you think the cops think about this? I think they're just waiting on the right legislation where they know how to classify.
I'm guessing the cops are pissed off as well, because every time there's an accident, a guy on a scooter is treated legally as a pedestrian, so they can't really fine him or do anything.
This is ridiculous. So they love finding people. So definitely, I think we
could solve a lot of problems just by decreasing the top speed by, what is it now? I think it's 20. Is it 25?
No, there is no top speed. That's the thing. The legislation wants to bring in a top speed of 25 kilometers an hour.
Some of them go a lot faster than that.
Right now, aren't they capped? The ones that are available now, aren't they capped?
Some of them might be capped electronically, but legally, if you have your own scooter and you're going 40 kilometers an hour,
that's definitely a problem.
And by the way, that's a big new trend. People buying the scooters. They're about €500.
Well, that's going to be the next stage. When the price comes down, people are going to have their own. They don't want to rent. They want to have their own. They're going to personalize it and make it. They're going to pimp it out, basically.
Also, it's not just scooters. There's always mopeds now. These ING bank sponsored. It's the same thing. Also, you use an app to unlock them. The helmet's in the boot, but it leads to a lot of mopeds.
If we could bring the max speed down on scooters to 15, I'd be okay with that. It's the speed factor. The speed factor is what ruins everything. People don't know how to behave properly on them. Even in the article we mentioned from Gazeta Pravna, the hospital people say that a significant portion of the people with injuries are impaired by alcohol. The people being stupid, basically.
Like I said, there's some parts of the city where, fair enough, crack on, you're not going to hurt anyone. But in its central part, Krakow is a narrow, tight, medieval town that you can walk around very easily. That's one of the great things about this city, you don't need public transport. You can walk most places. God's sake.
Well, on that note, let's leave scooters behind us. It's a very warm day as we're recording this, middle of August, so we're not really thinking about the heat too much. Well, heating, I should say. We are thinking about the heat. We're not thinking about
beads of sweat.
Not thinking about turning on the heat.
Down your big
That's the last thing we're talking
John.
about. But the city of Krakow is thinking about turning on the heat.
I see what he did there, Mike. That's what they call a link in the business.
That is a rare talent, isn't it?
It is on.
Like Kent Brockman without the mane of hair.
Starting next month, the city is going to start enforcing a new ban on burning solid materials to heat your home. Coal, wood, garbage, shit, and whatever people burn these days. This is the enforcement of a law that was passed last year. Of course, the idea is to combat the smog problem, the pollution problem. Guys, do we really think they're going to start writing huge tickets to little old ladies who haven't made the switch to gas?
Let's be clear here. Domestic heating is the issue. This is how every other city that solved this problem has done it. Encouraged like gas, oil. Oil is really clean as well with the modern burners. But, they're going to have to do some kind of stick along with the carrot. But the carrot isn't being rolled out enough for me. You should be getting a huge tax write-off to convert a building to gas. It's a small enough city. There's not that much old housing stock when you add it all up. It could easily be done, a bit of leadership from Mike Krofsky.
We can wish for everything, I guess.
Wake up, man!
The truth is, though, the amount of stoves, or furnaces in Krakow has been dwindling even before they started bringing in these government subsidized programs.
The government says there are 2,500 buildings left with these old school heaters.
But in the 90s, it was somewhere around 200,000. When they started the program where they would actually pay for the replacement with gas heaters, it was only around I think it was 30,000, something like that in that ballpark. And now it's down only to several thousand. And a lot of those are just buildings that are supposed to be demolished anyway, buildings that are located in areas where there is no gas or electric hooked up to it, or there's just a little old lady. It's a handful of places left.
Just to give a little example, though, in Ireland we have housing estates. A couple of hundred houses around a couple of big fields. That's a very common way people live in the suburbs, and most of them houses are gas or oil now, so you don't see many people using their coal fire anymore. Although all the houses have one. But I'll always remember whenever I'd be out servicing boilers, there'd always be one house in the winter that'd be burning the coal fire, and the entire estate is choking on this smoke. I mean, you would not believe how much smoke comes out of one domestic household. I mean, it's just something that you have to really encourage. I mean, obviously, Krakow has the biggest disadvantage of it all, which is the area, the weather, the humidity, the low pressure, all that. So we're up against it anyway. Might not solve the problem.
But totally, actually, what you were talking about, those housing estates, that's one of the main reasons the amount of furnaces like that in Krakow disappeared. When they were building up new buildings or renovating anything, they would not, put in new coal furnaces. They would put in gas or electric or central, hot water. So that was the main reason why, they were plummeting the amount of furnaces in Krakow. No programs, no subsidies or anything like that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. To get the last bit done, which is still really important, we need to go full stick and carrot, I think. I think, and Krakow, this is a problem we can solve, man. I'm fucking optimistic.
Well, I think with it would have been cheaper if on those furnaces they would just require e-scrubbers and stuff like that pick up a lot of the particulate matter. But what I am annoyed by is my parents have a fireplace in their house. And we literally use it twice a year, like Christmas and maybe New Year's, something like that. Yeah. We couldn't be bothered. It was basically just an ornamental thing. It was nice. And now legally we can't use that either.
Smokeless coal. You can use smokeless coal.
No,
Everyone uses it in Ireland.
But you can't use it now with this law.
All right, but if you must use it, it's way less damaging than smokeless coal.
The point being that if you're using smokeless coal, there's no smoke coming out your chimney, so no one's going to catch you.
Dr. Mike, as you said, there are a lot of situations where the gas infrastructure doesn't reach a particular building, or that building is going to be destroyed anyway. The city government also says there are lots of situations where the ownership situation of the building is unclear, and so the question of who's going to pay for it is not settled. And on top of that, this is interesting. The city says that there are about 1,000 property owners who have simply refused to do it. No, they're not going to do it. I guess my suspicion is that they're waiting for the national government to pay for it, so they don't have to do it. But what do you do with these 1,000 people who say, yeah, no thanks, not going to do it?
Well, what I think is funny is like in this article we were looking at, they said they only had about 20 or 30 inspectors to begin with. So when this does start, it's going to take them forever to check everybody. And I wonder what kind of legal authority to have. Can they actually knock on your door and demand to come in to see what you're burning in your stove or in your furnace? Can they? Do they have to call the cops? If so, is there a procedure or
isn't
warrant?
the evidence from what you can see outside looking at the chimney, isn't that enough?
Not really, no, because how can you prove that it's just not steam or like...
Is this black?
These days,
dirty water, I don't know.
cheap drones, you could easily put a prevention.
No, they can
place.
test the smoke.
And you can do enough of it, right? Enough of it where it gets in the media, enough where they know it's being enforced. And at the same time as you're enforcing it, you're saying to people, look at this cashback scheme we got going on over here, you know? This makes
Other
no sense
taxpayers
to
are paying for something even though there are better solutions, yeah.
Yes, okay, but Krakow is, because of its geography especially, we need to get this 100% right with the emissions. We really do. Because, look, smog problems have been solved in good countries around the world. Didn't LA used to have a huge smog problem? And then
Still does.
Still does? Yeah. Well, we got rid of ours in Dublin. Smoggiest city in Europe. There you go.
Maybe we can get rid of LA. That would solve our problems.
Arizona Beach, yeah.
I'd love to see LA, man.
Let's move on.
I'd be disappointed.
So would a lot of people.
Let's move on to this story. If you follow American politics this week especially, you've seen how people under suicide watches in very sensitive, high-profile cases can somehow kill themselves.
The stakes were made.
Well, Poland had its kind of similar, not exactly the same thing, but a similar case, Dr. Mike, involving
Epsteinian levels of intrigue.
Involving somebody who threatened to blow up the Polish parliament.
Yes.
Juicy.
Brunon Kwiecień, although half the articles I read cite him as Bruno K, even though his name is public knowledge.
What kind of name is that, Brunon? I've never seen that before.
Brunon, I don't know. It's a weird name. But I believe it was in 2011-12, he was apparently planning, he was convicted, so he was planning, an attack on the same. He wanted to drive up with a military truck that he wanted to buy in surplus with 4 tons of explosives.
I have to say, it sounds like a pretty sinister plan.
Yeah. And
that sounds like it would blow up a building.
He was
easily.
a chemistry professor at the agriculture university here in Krakow. So, he knew his shit as in, nitrogen
Cue the
explosives.
inevitable Breaking Bad references.
Exactly. And they talked that he was talking with students and grad students, see what the political frame of mind is, if anybody would think this was a good idea. And then they found some, proof saying that he was planning this kind of attack.
He actually brought this up. What would you think about an attack on the parliament with explosives?
Yeah, it's like, we could make these here with what we have. It's like,
Smart guy.
But apparently he was being investigated by ABW, so the Internal Security Agency.
Two mentions this week.
Yes, and he claimed that they were the ones goading him on, preparing him, giving him access. Basically. Yeah, it was entrapment, but it looks suspicious anyway. And he was originally sentenced to 13 years. It went down to 9 years. He would have been out in about 2 years or something like that anyway. But they found him dead in his jail cell earlier this week. Suspicious, yes. But the first autopsy reports are coming in saying it was just a subarachnoid hemorrhage, a type of stroke that can happen to people in their 50s if they, they're smokers, drinkers, high blood pressure, etc. But
prison.
It looks kind of, a little funny, especially since he was demanding to.
So we're talking no neck marks or anything.
No, nothing like that.
As things stand now, no foul play suspected.
No foul play. It just happened to happen just when his cellmate was being taken out to go do something else. So he was alone in there, and apparently nobody else.
It's not the first time prisoners under these type of conditions and cases have died in Polish prisons, though, is it?
Dr. Mack, while we've got you here, and again, in light of what's going on,
suicide is the number one reason.
What's going on in light of the Epstein thing in America and this guy dying in a cell? Theoretically, and you're speaking as a doctor. Theoretically, if you were in a prison cell with very basic clothing and shoes, nothing that you could use to kill yourself, how would you kill yourself?
You're asking questions I've
theoretically.
Are you asking for a friend?
I'm asking for a friend. Yeah. How do people do this?
With clothes, you can. That's always material that you turn into a
yourself.
noose.
Okay, let's say you're naked. How do you kill yourself? Can you?
You can, but there's got to be a lot of self-determination here. One of the things would be to bite through your tongue, which is not as easy as you think. I don't know. You have to put your head against the wall, slam your. Uppercut yourself so your teeth go through your tongue, and what happens
bleed
is
to death or something.
No, actually, you probably won't bleed to death. The idea is that you tether the blood vessels inside your tongue, and your tongue swells up and you suffocate. And that's something that can, if there's nobody there to resuscitate you or intubate you, you can be dead in a minute or two from suffocation.
Okay.
That's one way.
Anyone else, and I would have thought that was a horrible question, but because Mike's a doctor, I knew he'd say something weirdly fascinating. So
Never thought about that. Yeah,
that's actually something that might happen occasionally if people when they get their tongue pierced. That's it doesn't happen very often, but they'll pierce the tongue next.
Okay, reel him back in.
Yeah, I don't know how to step back from this one. We're looking over the edge here, Dave. I don't know what to do now. I really don't know what to
about
do.
40 minutes, I'm sweating.
Look down. Yeah.
Sweating like a biggie over here.
Okay, well, there we go. Okay, anyway, so we're going to bring things to a close on that tongue-biting note, I guess. I don't know how to segue from that.
Well, basically, there wasn't much details in the article about how he died, really, was there?
So, we don't know. There's no autopsy.
There's no
autopsy, but it's just
suspicious, I suppose.
Did you mention he was from Krakow, by the way? Did you say that?
Yeah, the Agriculture University here in Krakow.
Yeah. So it's just interesting. The guy who threatens to blow up the parliament goes to prison for it, dies in prison. Okay, maybe it's natural causes, maybe it isn't. And again, the timing with the Epstein thing in America is
just weird. What are you thinking about that, by the way? I mean, I think everybody in the world went, really? Whoa, that's...
What do I think about what, Epstein?
What do you think?
Epstein?
About it, yeah, obviously.
Maybe he bit his tongue off. I don't know.
I don't really put much stock in conspiracy theories, but
I don't either. But suddenly everybody looks at this and
both
says,
sides are kind of go,
Exactly.
I think the people, I think the security guards there didn't understand that suicide watch doesn't mean you watch somebody committing suicide.
Yeah.
It's a gift you get if you successfully commit. Here, have a watch.
That's it for this week, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the KrakCast News.